All right, we're here. I'd like to welcome Noah, the quiet one, apparently. So you don't have to be too quiet. Hopefully, we're gonna hear from
Yeah,
you.
that's leftover from Justin's show.
How you doing?
Pretty good. How about you?
Oh, okay. So y'all burn out a little bit from Justin.
Not really. I did that around 5, so it's been a couple hours. Is there a delay?
Okay, Christian. Yeah, I think there might be a little bit one.
I'm personally doing fine. Yeah.
How you? So you're dealing with the corona? Okay.
Oh yeah. Just having some self-isolation, but I'll be okay.
Great. Well, it's good to meet you. This is the first time here, but
Yeah.
I've seen you around a little bit. Seen you on some other shows. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Deacon, welcome, buddy. How you doing? Finally got you on.
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Oh, we're great. I'm great here. Finally got a Saturday off work, and I'm gonna enjoy it with you fine people.
Awesome. Excited.
Yeah. So I came across this video. It was shared by someone on social media. I'll probably get the name wrong, so I won't even attempt it. I'll probably mess it up. So it's a new channel, about 2 or 3 weeks old. So it's when the first video was posted. But I talked to him online a little bit about this topic. But he's in Lebanon, I believe. But it's great content, really professional video. But of course, obviously, I disagree with a few of the views. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to watch the video and just y'all tell me what y'all think, and we'll get it started. So it's only about an 8.5 minute video, so it shouldn't be too long. But if there's something you want
to, can we call out pauses, or do we have to wait
for
the end of the video?
Oh, okay. Call out a pause anytime you want.
Okay.
Just say hold up or whatever, No worries. So yeah, we'll get it started and see how it goes.
I don't know how many times I've come across atheists who say that even though our universe is meaningless, one can still lead a meaningful life. Statements such as these sound nice for sure, but sounding nice is not quite the same thing as making sense. And since atheists usually take pride in their alleged commitment to rationality, a fishy statement such as there is no objective meaning to the universe, but you can still create your own meaning certainly deserves some scrutinizing. That's exactly what this video is about, and what you'll learn by the end of it is that any atheist talk about creating your own meaning in an otherwise meaningless universe is nothing but a grandiose exercise in self-deception.
We can pause there.
Yeah.
No problem.
This is Lucas from Deflate.
No problem. What's up?
So I don't know. I guess I'll jump in. I feel like we should define atheism. I mean, that makes sense. If we're going to talk about what there is meaning and what there is not meaning in, we should probably establish a common definition of the term.
Wow, if only it were that easy, right?
Yeah, we'll see how well that goes. So yeah. I guess I'll propose what I think atheism is, at least what it means to me, and then perhaps you'll agree, and ideally you won't, and we can discuss it.
Sure.
So atheism, I usually define it as my worldview doesn't include any gods.
Okay.
I don't necessarily go with a lack of belief. I don't really think it's useful. I just say my worldview as presented does not include any gods.
But it would include a lack of belief, right?
Yeah, I don't believe in any gods, correct?
Right.
Well, I do want to say thank you for not limiting yourself to the lack of belief in gods. I find that to be somewhat annoying sometimes. Like it seemed, I don't want to accuse people of this, but sometimes it comes across as a sort of I'm trying to be as defensive as possible without defending anything,
Mm-hmm.
And
no,
like,
I understand. Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm an oppie atheist. I listen, I read his writings a lot, and I like his definition, which is the one that I usually operate with. So
great, yeah. We'll see it in the video a little bit later, but I've watched it several times already, obviously. But his Lucas is the guy's name here, who runs Deflate. Real nice guy. I've talked to him online. Super nice guy. But his position is somewhat that atheism isn't exactly nihilism, but that atheism definitely leads to nihilism. That it's logically inconsistent to be an atheist and not be a nihilist.
Okay, well, so I guess does Noah and also is it James? Would you prefer?
James, Deacon James, either way.
Okay, so I'll go with James and Noah.
Alright.
Do James and Noah agree that we can think atheism as just a worldview that lacks gods? There is no gods in
Sure.
our worldview.
Just non-theist.
I like that definition. Never heard that
So-
one before.
I think that atheism is too broad, and I think because of the sort of the popularism within atheism,
Mhm.
I think it's changed, especially since people like Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
It used to be more of a positive argument that there is no God.
Mhm.
So I think it's become too broad of a thing where it kind of means whatever you have to talk to the person who is an atheist.
So
Yes.
I've read the Stanford Encyclopedia on what atheism was historically. I agree with you. Historically, atheism was in fact the position that there are no gods.
Mhm.
But I would say that right now, I think we should define theism as a worldview that includes gods, and atheism as a worldview that does not include gods.
Sure, like in the most bare bones, we could
Yeah.
do that. Yeah.
And then perhaps there's more specifics later on, but at least we can agree that that's the general framework we can operate in.
Just given the definition that you gave, though, it's not actually a truth claim; it's just a worldview claim.
I
So,
mean,
like,
yeah,
one could-
yeah,
One could be an atheist in the sense that, like, I live and act and have a worldview that doesn't include the idea of God in it, but
Mhm.
still, like, they could say feasibly yes that there is a God. You know.
Well, what you could say is you haven't ruled out the possibility entirely, but right now your worldview does not operate as if there are any.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I tend to hold to the definition, the Stanford Encyclopedia definition, that atheism is the belief there are no gods. But just simply because of the confusion that you get into when you start when you want to define it as the lack belief or just non-theist, and then get into the idea of agnostic and Gnostic atheism as things. Because
Yeah,
you do have to wind up equivocating on the word atheist to do that.
Yeah, I really
And-
honestly, like, I don't care if it's no gods in the worldview or no gods. I'm an atheist by all of those definitions, so I
Yeah,
don't really care.
Right. So yeah, I mean that's, like I said, that's Lucas in the video. His Deflate, his position is more of what atheism must lead to
Mhm.
if you adopt it, or if
And
you're
then-
being logically consistent.
So would you-
before we unpause, I don't want to interrupt you, but before we unpause, there's another word that he used, which is he's going to continue to use, which is meaning.
Right.
And I think it's important to also just quickly spitball a definition that we can potentially agree on, so that when we go on in the video, we don't have to keep redefining it and redefining it and redefining it. So, ballpark, either James or Noah, what do you think meaning is?
Purpose.
So yeah, given the context of this, I would have to say purpose. That in the way I think he's going to use it is purpose that comes from outside of yourself, transcending purpose, rather than a purpose that is self-determined.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to take issues with that, obviously, but we can.
I'm not
That's-
saying I
that's
agree or
beyond the
disagree. I'm just
Yeah.
guessing that's what he's. I haven't seen the video yet, obviously.
That's pretty close to what he's gonna argue for in the video. So
Okay. That's pretty much all I have to say to begin with.
Countering the skeptics' objections to Christianity. If you're new here, click that subscribe button to get our upcoming videos. So let's start with a simple observation. Generally speaking, on atheism, the natural world is all there is. Reality is ultimately made up of matter, and everything you see can be broken down into the particles of physics.
And we can pause there.
yeah, I think you're probably gonna say the same thing I was. Maybe maybe not, but atheism doesn't automatically assume naturalism. So
Well, it depends, right? So I
Right.
would say that there's naturalism on a methodology standpoint, and there's naturalism on a philosophical standpoint.
right,
So you could say, for example, that you believe that everything is necessarily natural, which is like philosophical naturalism. Or you could say that you cannot appeal to a supernatural explanation until we can demonstrate it, which is like more methodological naturalism.
right,
So some atheists hold to philosophical naturalism, some hold to methodological naturalism. So right there's a bit of a mistake in the sense that atheism doesn't establish hard naturalism. It establishes the absence of a god. And I don't know if God is the only supernatural
Well, like,
thing that could possibly exist.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I don't see. Yeah, so you could actually be an atheist and still believe in the supernatural.
Parts of it, yeah. If as long as it didn't include a god or
Right.
god claims, then yes.
Right. So that's why I meant that atheism doesn't necessarily assume either naturalism, either philosophical or methodological.
To be fair, I also don't believe in those things. Like I also reject ghosts and other
Right.
things like that.
That's fine.
I see no good reasons to believe in a supernatural realm. So, I mean,
Right.
I think that's where I would go.
Can you guys define what you're rejecting when you say, I reject supernaturalism?
Yeah. So there's nature,
Mm.
which is typically defined as what is in the scope of observability. Generally speaking, if we can observe it through senses, we can generally call it natural. Not always, but that's just kind of a rule of thumb. And then from there, supernature would be something that exists kind of independent of our ability to observe it and could not in fact be observed. It seems to be blocked from observation. So that would be what I would consider, but perhaps you have a better definition that you want to operate under.
So I actually sort of reject the whole natural supernatural dichotomy. I think it's kind of false, if anything. I think it presupposes that the two competing positions are atheism versus deism, where it's sort of like creation is independent from God. And I actually would have a more emergent understanding of God in creation, where creation is created by God. So like literally every quark, every subatomic particle is maintained and sustained by God. So if with that understanding, you could say in a sense everything is quote supernatural if it is something that's directly or indirectly or being sustained by God himself. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, but like for example, there's numbers and there's supernumericals.
Okay.
And that's like established in mathematics is like an example of how we can have the standard numerical system. And then like in base 11, base 12, we can have supernumericals that exist that do not follow the observation that we see inside numericals.
Okay.
So like super is being defined as not in fact observed. Because I would perhaps agree that once we can observe it, we could classify it as part of nature, our evolving understanding of what is natural.
Yeah, so I think with that, then I like that would be fine with me. It's just that all that means to me is that the solar systems we've not explored yet are supernatural. I think because we haven't observed them yet.
No, so there's a small distinction, right? Because I'm not saying that if it is in fact not observed, it is supernatural. I'm saying that once it becomes observed, it becomes part of the natural. And if
Okay.
we know that these exist, that is a form of observation, is it not?
If we know that they exist, it becomes a form. But would you say numbers exist then?
So numbers are descriptive, right? So we have for example an ice cube and another ice cube,
Mm.
and then we can use non-contradiction, identity, excluded middle,
Yeah.
the laws of logic, and say we can describe the fact that there is 1 and 2, but really what we're talking about is entity here, and we're describing things that exist independent of the numerical system.
So do numbers not exist then, or?
Well, there's imaginary and there's real numbers, right? Like this is a mathematics question, and I study biology, so I'm gonna have to kick the can down the road on that one and say, as far as I understand, it is that numbers are descriptive of a observation that we make.
I would say that numbers exist like language exists. Like language isn't a thing. It's a tool. It's language is just something we make up.
Yeah. But I think that so this goes into the philosophy of math, where we have the problem of, well, if it's just a language and nothing more, if it doesn't have a concreteness to it, why is it so consistent? And why can you tell someone is wrong when they're saying 2 + 2 = 5?
Well, that's the wrong question, right? The question should be, when we observe reality, why is it the case that we have consistent results independent of our descriptions? Right? Like even if we couldn't describe mathematics, it would be consistently true that a plus a is a squared, right? We would have that independent of being able to descript it. Yeah, that's what I mean. Sorry, mistake there. But kind of independent of that, we're describing something that we can observe and then attaching labels to it to make it easier to understand. And 2 + 2 actually isn't 4, and like for example, base 9. So it's not, in fact, the case that 2 + 2 always equals 4. We're talking about a specific numerical set.
How's
No,
2 plus 2 not 4 in base 9?
Is it not? I feel. Let me look it up.
well, like we could have. I mean, easily 2 could have been 3. Like it didn't have to be 2.
We're not talking about the sound or the symbols,
Right.
though. We're talking about the actual concept of 2 itself. Whatever we want to call it. If we want to call it, dos, or if we
Yeah.
want to call it, whatever.
Well, that's why it's a language. It's because we're just, it's like I said, it's descriptive. We're
But
describing.
we do have the languages for numbers, though. We have the sound that is 2. We have the Roman numeral of 2 eyes put together. That's 2.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Still
are different.
describing.
That's how we communicate the concept of one object or 2 objects.
But I'm going deeper than that. I'm going to the actual concept of 2 itself. And this is probably getting too far away from this. I don't want. Sorry,
What does
I don't
the
mean to.
concept of 2 itself mean? Like we have entity, and we're saying that the concept entity together is 2. We're describing something that exists independent of our descriptive ability.
Okay.
That's like the point of mathematics.
No, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at with that, though.
So I don't know why you're saying the actuality or the conceptualization of 2 when 2 is the only thing 2 is a descriptive term for entity.
Well, that's the thing. If you're saying it's only a descriptor, then it seems like, how can something only be a descriptor?
Well, it's the same way language is.
Well, you don't even have to equivocate. You can just say, I don't understand your question because your question isn't really applicable here.
Well, my point is that we're talking about natural versus supernatural, and you're saying that something that is natural, something that is observable, we can't directly observe 2. We can always observe 2.
Well, if
X
2 is
or
if
2Y.
2 is entity, then yes, we can directly observe 2.
I would take issue with I would honestly take issue with that definition of supernatural just a tad bit, also just because of it hinging on something being observable or not. Because and this is a problem too. We get with this. There's a very loose definition of supernatural, just basically because what we have at our disposal is the natural. There really can't be. I mean, I don't see how there could be a clear definition of supernatural.
That's like debatable though, because people who believe in God believe that supernatural exists, and they believe that there's good evidence for this.
Well, they believe it exists, but there's not a consistent definition of it either.
So a lot of as a Christian, as a theist, there are a lot of people who have the problems with the term supernatural, and I would be definitely one of them. I think supernatural is a messy word, and having this distinction between supernatural versus natural, I think, just creates more problems than it solves, honestly. And like, my point is showing those problems. That's kind of the point I want to bring up.
The reason why I think the distinction is important is because the reason why you don't like, or the reason why you don't think the distinction is relevant is because you hold the belief, and this is what I've gathered from talking to you, is that everything is a product of God, which would mean that everything is a God existed natural, right? Everything is a God created natural. And I'm saying the reason why I'm distinguishing supernatural from natural is because I believe that God is a claim of supernature. And the reason why I won't just rule it in with nature is because I believe nature has to be observed and demonstrated. I don't believe God is either of those two things.
Okay.
Well, if what you said, Deacon, is that everything that exists is emergent from God, correct?
Yes. Well, everything that begins to exist, yeah.
Well, okay. So everything that begins to exist, God. So everything that begins to exist is in that set of what you call natural, just everything that begins to exist.
I wouldn't call it natural or supernatural, and I don't like those terms.
Or not or supernatural. Just we're just going to call everything that exists. Let's just say everything that exists is reality.
Yeah.
So everything that exists is emergent from God. That means everything except God is in that set.
Well, I mean, God exists too. So, like,
right? You said everything that begins to exist.
Yeah.
Everything that is not emergent from God. Everything that is emergent from God is what we call reality. Is what you'd call reality.
Well, God is part of reality too, though. So yeah, but yeah.
So and that's where you get the problem, though. That's where you get the problem.
So, like, if the set definition, if the qualifier for the set is beginning to exist, and God didn't begin to exist, then God can't be in the set.
No. So I think we're switching around on things here, and not on purpose. So I'm talking about beginning to exist. I'm pointing to beginning to exist being emergent. And so God is not emergent, but God is part of reality, though.
So if we have
But
this
if
set,
reality is defined as beginning to exist, then how can it be inside the set?
I said emergent. We were talking about emergent.
right? So
The term emergent was used prior, and God doesn't emerge
No, I know,
from
but
himself.
you haven't escaped the issue though, because the
There's not
issue.
an issue though, because I'm saying God is part of reality, so God is in that set of reality. Yes.
So then, what would you call? Okay, so if we have a set of things that are emergent from God, that doesn't include God, what would you call that set?
Things that are emergent from God.
Okay, so that's what I would. So what you are saying is emergent from God, we would call the natural.
Okay.
And that means there has to be another set, which in your mind includes only God. That set would be what some people would label supernatural.
Okay.
So you just did a perfect job, John, of explaining why I differentiate natural and supernatural. Because the claim of God is fundamentally different than the claim of natural.
So only in the sense of emergence, but like you don't believe that the universe is emergent from God in any sense anyway. So I'm talking about emergence. I'm not talking about reality. And I think we're switching on the terms emergent and reality. When it comes to what everything that exists, that would include God in it.
Right. Well, in theory, like even in my understanding, I'm not discounting the possibility of what we call the supernatural existing as part of reality. Everything that exists is reality, so that could include the supernatural. My point is that there has to be a delineation between what I'm calling natural and what I'm calling supernatural.
To me, it gets even more complicated than that, because you have a set here, which is the emergence from God, which is like the natural. We describe as the natural. Then you have a set over here, which is exclusively God. It is the set of which God contains in and of itself.
Okay.
And I'm saying the qualification for that set, is it being God, or is there a separate qualifier that we can attach to that set that rules in God and rules out everything else?
Yeah, reality, existence.
That doesn't make any sense.
Includes God. So everything that exists would include God who exists.
So let me try again, right? There's a set over here that's emergent from God. That's reality, that's natural, right? Yeah. And you're saying...
No, he said God is included in the set reality.
No, I know. Yeah. The set is like a Venn diagram of sorts.
Right.
God bleeds into the set A, but I'm asking, what is the qualifier for set B that only God exists in, that we can rule in God, and what rules out everything else?
Okay, non-emergent exists and non-emergent.
So did not begin to exist? Is that what you're describing there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess what we would call supernatural is what did not begin to exist in your opinion.
Well, no, I would defer from, because you guys did talk about how you would define ghosts as supernatural, and ghosts would definitely begin to exist.
So James had a specific thing, which he was talking about so if it does not begin to exist, so it's different in the sense that God has its own category, because everything of which emerges from God is a category, but God's still part of that category, because there's a bleed over into reality that God must exist in order for emergence to occur. But there's a separate set that only God can exist in, and that's because we have the movement of the set, right? So God exists in that set because he is non-emergent, and that is the qualification that excludes everything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a weird subject. Like I said, we get into these the definitions. Like I said, there's really no.
We lost Noah. No.
Oh no, Noah already told me he might have to go. So Noah, thanks for coming by. Thanks for hanging out. It's probably late. I understand. I keep weird hours. But Noah's nice enough to be here several times before. Great dude. But I understand it's late. So these definitions are weird. It's you get into like, and that's the problem too, because everyone has their own idea of what supernatural is. You could ask, we could have somebody else in here that would say something totally different.
Well, that's why I don't think the word supernatural is helpful on frankly any side. I tend to stray away from it precisely because of these sorts of problems.
That's so weird. That's exactly why I think it's helpful.
Well, I think because okay, let me give an example.
Okay.
Let's say Jesus appeared in front of you and like he did the miracles and that sort of stuff. And like you could do whatever testing you wanted to do, and you're like, oh well, these like when Jesus, is pulling fish and bread out of this bag. You're looking in the bag. There's nothing in there. There's more and more and all. And you do everything to your satisfaction. Well, those are still things that are being observable. Like you're observing what's happening,
Mhm.
and you're going to have to try to figure out a formula of how this stuff happens.
You're observing the product, but not the mechanism.
But can we observe directly the mechanism, because it's all product of other stuff?
Well, no. So what I'm saying is like the best we can do in reality, and this is like issues with causal with
Yeah.
causal links, which is like
Yep.
we can observe A and we can observe B, and we don't exactly know how to put together those two in a causal link.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that like if we were to see a miracle, we could see the product, we could see product X, and we could
Yeah.
see that it came from starting Y, but that mechanism in between is we literally have no idea how to observe it.
Well, we would see Jesus doing these things, and he's saying, "I'm doing it. Watch, I'm doing it."
Yeah, we're observing the product though.
Right, we're not
Or
saying
observing the mechanism, which he is the mechanism of it, though. He would be the
Well-
mechanism. That would be the best. That would be if we're going to do it scientifically, where
Mhm.
like you can on call say like, Jesus, do this for me, and he does it.
Mhm.
Like that is the mechanism.
Right. Well, I agree that if you can make strong testable predictions, that is good evidence that
Like that would be the science.
It would become the best explanation for
Right.
what we see.
Yeah.
No, that I agree with you. The problem is we have no such thing.
No, but my point is like, let's say we could do that. My point is that would then be the science, and then that would be natural. But now you're calling a miracle natural because you can observe the mechanism, which is Jesus pulling these things out of.
Well, the thing is, if and this is perhaps a criticism of Christianity, is that I think it is true that if God were to in fact interact and entangle with the natural and start performing actions inside the natural, unless we want to fall into like this weird type of special pleading where like the mechanism can be supernatural, but the product and the starting point are completely natural, I would say that once it starts interacting in reality in a testable way, it's natural.
Yeah, I would agree and disagree with like, but that goes back to my problem with the natural supernatural distinction, is what I'm saying. Because yes, I would agree that like it's quote natural.
Unless you establish the natural supernatural, then you can't have your separate set that of non-emergence.
I don't want the separate set, is what I'm saying. No, you can have the emergent, and non-emergent separation.
Well, the thing is, right, your non-emergent set is a specific set that everything else is excluded from and God is included in. And that set is contingent on there being non-emergence in God, which would be unique to God, and all other properties could in fact exist within God, but non-emergence could not bleed over into the other set.
Non-emergence could not bleed. Why could it not bleed over into the other set?
Otherwise, the other set could come over to the God set.
Why not? Why is that a problem?
Because not everything has the one trait that you think is special to God. Like, wouldn't that make it no longer God having a special trait that would be able to file it into its own set?
I don't think that's necessarily a problem. I think that the idea, like the whole point of the incarnation, is that God comes down into the emergence. Like he emerges himself into the emergent set.
If something else was non-emergent, would it also be God?
I don't think necessarily.
Okay, that's what
so that's an issue though, because then the set of which includes God, if the thing that excludes all other things is not in fact non-emergence, then what is it?
No, like you can. So when we're talking about emergence versus non-emergence, we're talking origins. All right.
Okay.
So origins is one question already. Think of it this way: like I'm born. I'm in the set of born in, Florida.
Okay.
Someone else is in the set of not born in Florida. Okay.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they're not allowed to meet. That doesn't mean they're not allowed to be in Florida together. So likewise, God is in the set that is, not born in Florida or just not emergent.
So that was like,
that doesn't,
or on my point. Like my point was not can God interact with other attributes of other creatures. That wasn't my point. My point was that at the beginning of the conversation, you said that what differentiated like a God from any other property was that God was non-emergent.
Yeah.
And I said, and then you said that other things could have the property of non-emergence and not be God.
Like I think it's logically possible, I suppose. Yeah. I'm not saying that there are such things.
I know, but
Right,
if
but
it's
there's no
wait,
contradiction there.
logically, are you saying epistemically, or are you saying ontologically?
I'm saying that I can't think of anything, maybe numbers, but I would say that in the sense that numbers are sort of the eternal thoughts of God, if anything. So maybe numbers you could put in there.
Sorry, I'm probably not communicating myself. It's like really late, but so the set of God, right?
Okay.
Set God exists here. Set everything else exists here. It's basically an A and not A, God and not
Okay.
God, right?
Mhm.
Non-emergence was the qualifier to make it God, right? That was the set that everything else couldn't have, but only God can have, which makes it God.
Well, yes, but this doesn't exhaust the whole separation. This is just for the purpose of showing the question, talking about the question of natural versus supernatural.
Okay,
yes.
so there is more things that some other creature could not have that God does have that creates the God.
Well, that
Or
wouldn't create
give
the God.
give the attributes to God. Sorry.
Sure.
So what are those things, like independent of non-emergence?
Independent, yeah, non-emergence, which would then also be eternality. Although, well, actually, no, you would have to be eternal if you're
No,
non-emergent.
yeah, you'd have to do something. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you could go into the omnis and stuff, but I would say that eternal fellowship would be another part of it because I believe in a triunity of God.
Okay. Are we gonna put in the omnis? Are we gonna put an omni-triadic like benevolence, omniscient, and potent?
I would say we can, but I don't think that I have to. Yeah, we'll go to that. Yeah, sure.
Okay,
We'll
so the only follow-up is like, could a species or could a thing not called God have any of those things?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. So I was just trying to set up a category set so that we could say this is God and this is not God, and what makes God God cannot be held by not God.
So what makes God God could not be held by not God.
Basically, trademark characteristics.
Yeah, that works too. Yeah.
Okay, so I think so. This is where I think we're getting a little bit far away from what's happening right here in the video, which is fine by me.
I'm loving the content.
Yeah,
I'm loving listening to y'all. I really am. I was like,
because like
the
part
video
of my thoughts immediately go with this are part of the incarnation itself of Christ himself.
Okay.
And I could delve into that, but I think it's going way too far away from here because that is an issue that we talk about within Christianity. We talk about the two natures of Christ, him being fully divine and fully man as well.
Or we're going to like Trinitarian specifics, right? Like if we were to
Well,
do
no,
that.
the incarnation is about Christ himself, which is the second person of the Trinity, and talking about the nature of the incarnation. So he's not half God and half man. He's not God pretending to be man. He's fully God and fully man. So he has a created body with it, which is genuinely made within creation, but he is also fully God.
So really quickly, because like you say fully God and fully man, and we already established that God is in set A, and everything that's not in set A is not God. So if in fact God becomes a part of set B and still holds attributes from set A, that's a fundamental contradiction.
Only if we are talking about those diagrams as continuous rather than as this is the initial sort of category. So, for instance, we talk about the emergent part. The emergent part is that the fact is that they were created. Okay.
Okay.
So we could talk about the body of Christ being created, but he is also fully emerged, fully united with the body.
So there's full emergence in the man, and there's full non-emergence in the God, right?
In the Godhead, yeah. So it's like the idea of, well, that person was not born in Florida, but that does not mean that they can't come into Florida.
But you defined it as such, though. You said that if you said that God is part of set A, and everything that makes God qualified to be in set A cannot be held by set B. It's unique to set A. So that is like saying if you're born in Florida, you necessarily have to keep the Florida, and you cannot bleed over into catching more attributes into
it would be like saying if you're born in Florida, you can't also be born in Tennessee.
And you seem to be suggesting you can be.
No. So I think you're okay. So with the incarnation, what we're talking about is that the second person of the Trinity did not begin to exist at conception. All right. But we are talking about that through the incarnation.
So then it's not fully emergent then.
I'm sorry?
So then it's not fully emergent.
Well, if you want to define it that way, sure, yeah. I don't think there's a problem with that. But that doesn't mean that he can't come into creation, though.
Well,
Like,
I like what can be done with God is like I guess anything. But like my question is like, so if man is part of set B, and set B has to be emergent, right? It has to be coming from God. And you're saying that it's 100% emergent while also being 100% non-emergent. And you're saying that isn't a problem because you can be born in Florida and still go to Tennessee. And I'm saying that's a problem because what you said in the initial point was that in order for God to be God, you have to be born in Florida, and only God can be born in Florida.
no, I'm saying God can't be born in the sense of like non-emergent. He's non-emergent, but he can come into creation.
I
But
understand.
that creation isn't the starting. That incarnation is not the starting of his existence.
I get that. That doesn't escape the problem that I criticized, though.
Yeah, I don't see how it is a problem. Let me put it on a sort of down to earth level. The second person of the Trinity exists eternally, decides to enter into creation as a human, so he is joined to
Emergence.
Yeah, so he is joined through, but that emergence is not an ontological emergence of his innermost self as the second person of the Trinity.
Is it epistemically the emergence?
I don't know how it would be epistemically the emergence. It would be the emergence through the incarnation of the body of Christ. The body of Christ began to exist.
So if it's not if it's not ontologically emergence, and it's also not epistemically emergence, then how could it be emergence?
What do you mean by epistemically emergent?
Like,
I understand ontological emergence. I don't know how epistemic emergence would work out.
No, you're right. I don't think epistemic applies there.
Well, James.
So my point being that
I think I get what James is saying. He's saying that physically, Jesus's physical body began to exist, so it doesn't have an emergent quality.
Yeah.
The spiritual, the God part of Jesus existed with God, so it would be at that non-emergent set.
Yeah, the second person of the Trinity, sans incarnation, is eternal. But when we talk about the incarnation, that is the beginning of the body of Christ. Jesus himself, the second person, enters into creation through the virginal conception, which obviously you don't agree with on all that, but that's
right. I do see what you're saying. Like,
no, I get. No, yeah. I've always understood that the non-emergence into emergence through sans. I understand what you're saying. What I'm asking though is like we're getting into the point where you're saying the God set is non-emergent. It goes into emergence through the human set and becomes 100% both emerging and non-emerging.
Yeah, I'm talking about where there is a beginning of existence, of any existence whatsoever, where you can where that has not always existed.
So the flesh of Jesus Christ, is that emergent?
Yes.
Okay, so if the flesh of Jesus Christ is emergent, but like the spirit is non-emergent, and you're saying it's 100% both of those things, I'm asking you, that means that there is in fact an entity that is both emergent and non-emergent, therefore completely destroying the idea of two separate sets.
No,
James, are you a dualist? Like you do subscribe to that, correct?
My anthropology is still being worked out.
But you believe in like a separate body and a soul, sort of like somewhat like that.
For now, we will say yes.
So then, yeah. So basically, it's not really a logical inconsistency if you assume that these things that is true, that there is both a non-physical person and a physical person.
Even if you believe that, they still intertwine in a way that exists in reality.
Okay, so I think what you're thinking is what's a heresy called monophysitism, which you're an atheist and now you're also a monophysicist, so you got all this heresy going on. So monophysitism is the belief that Christ has one nature, and that nature, how they define it different ways, but one nature. All right. I'm a diaphysicist, which is the historic position, which is Christ has two natures. So we talk about the human nature, which is created, and we're talking about the divine nature, which is not created. So you can have that non-emergent divine nature enter into. Emergence is not merely entering into creation. Emergence is beginning to exist. That is what puts it in that category. All right. So the human nature is emergent because it began to exist. The divine nature enters into. All right.
Yes. No. So, wow. Okay. I understand. Right. Like your point. Your point on the dualism is well understood. Right. I get the fact you're talking about the two different things. I was just taking issue, and perhaps this is not actually a contradiction, but I'm spitballing in the sense that if set A was one of the qualifiers for set A that couldn't be a part of set B was non-emergence, and I thought that the claim is that it wasn't possible for characteristics of set A to interact with characteristics of set B in the same piece.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get that either. Basically, it's just one of those things that, because in a sense, it's not so much that they can't interact. It's just that one can't be, the non-emergent part can't be true of anything in set B.
Except for Jesus.
Well, then you get into the idea of, like James said, it's the physical body is emergent, but the physical body.
I'm
is
okay
not the
with
divine
Jesus
portion.
being an exception to the rules. I just need like an explanation if that's the case.
Right. So I think what I would have said if I was, a Christian or anything, is that, like, kind of like what James said, is the physical body is emergent. It began to exist. I'm just repeating what James said. I think the divine.
No, I get this part. I understand this part.
The divine portion, which is God, the divine part of Jesus, was not emergent.
Yeah. So the divine part,
the fact that they interact,
the divine nature, the divine nature does not become part of the category of emergent. In that initial point of emergence versus non-emergence, because I'm talking about origins.
Yeah.
So we were talking about,
so the flesh and the spirit are completely separate in that instance. Like they
they're
don't actually
joined together. They're joined together.
See, that's where I'm getting confused, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're separate, I can buy it. The conversation's over. We can move on if they're separate. But if you're saying they're joined together, then I think it's a contradiction.
Okay,
because they're working together.
So the idea that they're joined together in the sense that they're made one, that would be where the contradiction is, and that would be the monophysitism. They are two natures that are not like mixed. All right, without mixture. So we always point to one person, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, with two natures. So the nature is in the emergent, the human nature is emergent, and the divine nature is non-emergent. So it is two persons meeting, or two natures together meeting in one person. All right.
But most Christians would say that every person has two natures, in a sense, correct?
No,
spiritual
that would go into, that goes a bit complicated, but no, we wouldn't say that. We'd say that every human has one nature.
So humans,
in this sense, yeah.
So humans don't have a spiritual portion?
That would just be part of our human nature.
So now that's getting confusing to me.
So is any part of the spiritual nature non-emergent?
Any part of our spiritual nature non-emergent?
Yeah, like me or you.
No. Yeah, we don't exist eternally.
What?
We are all emergent. Yeah.
That seems okay. Is it or is it not the case that when we die, our spirits go to, or I guess not, whatever, call it whatever you want to, or I don't really care about the semantics. Our non-physical selves, whatever goes up to heaven, stays with God eternally.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry. When I'm saying the word eternally, I mean like without beginning. Yes, we have an everlasting life, sure, but I'm saying that we are not eternal in the sense of having always existed. Sorry, yeah, just to clarify.
So from sans creation, it's everlasting from that point.
Yeah, from creation. Yeah.
Okay, so it's
and that would be only for the redeemed, not like I'm an annihilationist, so I'd say that those who are not redeemed are cease to exist.
Okay, I don't see anything ontologically inconsistent about that. So
okay,
yeah, I mean I could get into there's a lot we could get into deeper, but I mean I think we kind of see where everybody is on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's.
That was a long.
Hey,
by
the way,
yeah.
atheists noticed how I didn't use the word. Well, how do you demonstrate that? like once. Like I didn't
You.
I didn't go into the classic atheist refrain of I don't want to talk about the ontology. I just want to talk about the epistemic nature.
Yeah.
But
And I didn't accuse you of being axe murderers either. So
it was a good conversation.
Yeah, so let's do a total reset of topic and go back to the video.
Awesome. Let's do it. Let's
No,
do it.
no, not seriously. I loved that. That was great. Yeah, but so just to remind everybody, we're watching a video about why there is no meaning in atheism, and we'll let Lucas share that with us on the video.
This, of course, includes you as a human being. According to atheists, you're just a somewhat more complex arrangement of matter and thus only slightly different from a brick stone. Well, okay, unlike a brick stone, you're at least a living organism made up of cells with the ability to reproduce, but don't ever think that you're somehow special. No. Just like the mosquito annoyingly buzzing over your head at night or the mouse roaming your backyard, you're nothing but a collection of randomly mutated genes and biomolecules which natural selection graciously picked in the course of history. And that's because at the bottom layer of reality is just raw matter. Ever since our purposeless universe inexplicably popped into existence with neither cause nor goal. What's more, that universe is slowly but steadily running out of energy.
Yeah.
Can I say the first thing with this?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a lot of preaching to the choir like that. Like I wouldn't want to use this. So the thing is, I don't necessarily disagree with everything he's saying, but like it's rhetorical more than. So it seems much more of like I'm preaching to the choir rather than trying to reach out to atheists.
It was funny because Pine Creek, I don't know if you guys know who he is.
I know about him. Yeah.
He's he actually covered a different video that Lucas does, and one of the things he said was, "Man, without atheists, Christian YouTubers wouldn't have much to talk about." I thought that was great. He's like, he better be. He should like thank us that we're atheists.
So what I find funny about what is his name, Lucas, I think it is?
Lucas, yes.
Yeah, what I think funny about what Lucas is doing is he's describing facts about the universe and then implying that those facts are like evil or bad. Like he's saying we're made of matter. Got you, atheists. Like,
yeah. Like why is it bad to be made of matter?
Like not even why is it bad? Like even if it was bad, does that change the reality of it?
Well, yeah, I think his point is that like whether or not it's true, like then the fact would be that there is no meaning. His point, I think.
So
Right.
I get what he's doing, but it's I guess what I wish he wouldn't do was basically just list off a bunch of things that some atheists do, some atheists don't believe, and then at the end of it just say, with no intention, there's no purpose, which I'm assuming is what he's going to get. Like, where is he going to say there's no intention, therefore there's no meaning?
Well,
Like I'm waiting for him to get there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Let's see. I think he may get there. He may not. Go ahead.
Maybe this is too late saying in, but like I am one Christian YouTuber who has made I think one video about atheism, and that's about it. Out of like my dozens or so.
Make more.
No, it's not my thing.
We love them. I'm probably subscribed to more Christian content creators than I am atheists.
I absolutely am. All I do is watch Lane Craig.
Oh, I can't do that.
Hey, I love WLC. Don't insult WLC.
I'm not. I couldn't just watch William Lane Craig. I'd have to get something else.
I prefer his philosophy to his theology, so I'll say that.
Until it will die the so-called heat death, which will mean that at some time in the future, neither movement nor life will be possible anymore, as the universe will return to the randomness, nothingness, and meaninglessness from which it emerged in the first place. So far, so good. I'm fully with the atheist hypothesis. But now comes the not-so-subtle atheist sleight of hand. Because instead of actually being consistent and affirming that the meaninglessness of the universe necessarily implies the meaninglessness of his or her own existence, the atheist now simply turns around and claims that you can nevertheless create your own subjective meaning. You may rally, for example, for some cause of social justice, devote yourself to animal rights, donate to the Richard Dawkins Foundation, or simply enjoy yourself and eat ice cream while sunbathing at the beach. Whatever you pick, it will provide you with an island of meaning in the vast ocean of our universe's meaninglessness. As I said in the beginning, while this may sound beautiful, it's not only rationally inconsistent to the highest degree, but also a ridiculous form of self-deception.
We can
Because
pause
if
there.
the material
I
universe...
was just about to actually.
So he seems to be making a reverse fallacy of composition, which normally you would say that what is true of the part is not necessarily true of the whole.
The division fallacy.
But yeah, it's a division fallacy in the sense that what is true of the whole is not necessarily true of the parts.
I'm not going to bring it up, but I would bring up the exact, like, where I commented on this video.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what I told him he was doing.
Even if you wanted, and I'm sure perhaps you agree with this, James, even if you wanted to say that it is the fact that in the grand scheme of the universe, there's no grand meaning, there is no grand intentional purpose under an atheistic framework. My point is that does not exclude the potentiality for meaning in the parts of the sum if all you've done is demonstrate why it can't exist in the sum of the parts.
I largely agree. And so my thing is this: to say that there is no meaning within atheism or within an atheistic worldview, I should say, is to define meaning as a sort of transcendent meaning, okay, where it has to go to the highest echelons possible, logically possible, with God. And without God being there, then there is just no meaning whatsoever. You can have meaning that you create or that others can create for you, but it would be contingent, I would say, rather than maybe not contingent. Well, it would definitely be contingent. And I'm trying to. You
wouldn't say it's logically inconsistent, though, like what Lucas says.
Wait, what's logically inconsistent? Sorry.
That subjective meaning is logically inconsistent with atheist worldview.
No, like that. That's the only type of meaning I would say you could have is the subjective meaning, and then we could go into like levels of subjectivity. So, like, you could be like, well, there is actually this, this super intelligent race of aliens that created, or not created, but like, sort of we're in their little test tube on planet Earth, and their meaning for us is to see what we do, kind of thing. But that wouldn't technically be objective. That would just be a higher up the step ladder of subjectivity. My point is, like, I think this is, again, more rhetorical than a sort of logically. This isn't an argument I would necessarily use, because people tend to be fine with, like, well, I have meaning. It is subjective, sure, but I have a meaning. I have a reason for living.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of it. I laid out a syllogism for him.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say it right now. I'm gonna get a little more into the video because I think there's a point where it becomes more relevant. But the thing you said, Christian, was the exact fallacy I accused him of doing. It's so, and I love that you said that before I did, because
heathens think alike, buddy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's to me it was, and I laid out the syllogism, and it'll become more clear because I'll give you the syllogism. I laid him out two syllogisms. The first one had to do with meaning and the universe and atheism, things like that, and then the second one had to do with something else. Both were flawed for the same reason, in my opinion. He only took issue with the second one, the one that didn't include meaning. I'll get to it later, but I'll kind of explain a little more in a minute. But watch a little bit more of this.
Yeah. Universe is all there is. The notion that you can actually create meaning, which is, of course, an immaterial concept, makes as much sense as to think that you can throw a bucket into a dried up well to pull water from it. In addition, even if you could magically create meaning in a materialistic and objectively meaningless universe, this subjectively created meaning of yours would be entirely pointless. For if ultimately nothing matters, then whatever you contrive to be your purpose.
Isn't it his subjective opinion that my meaning is pointless?
Yes. So
it is actually his opinion. Yeah. Like what he is professing right now is his opinion, and whether he bases that on observed fact is not really relevant here because he hasn't presented any. All he's saying is that under the atheist worldview, right, you cannot have any meaning because it's objectively pointless in the summation, right? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like looking at a painting and saying this painting objectively is pointless, and that means that every single individual part of the painting must also follow that rule. And we're still doing the division fallacy in the sense that if I'm saying that I find meaning in this, and you're saying that's pointless, we're both just, it's like, can I cuss?
Sure.
It's more like, just look at me, I'm an asshole. Look at you, you're an asshole. Like we're all just saying, I find meaning in this, and you're saying that's pointless. It's all a subjective assessment at that point.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, I think with the painting is a good example. Like I think you may have said it differently, but like if you have paint on that hasn't been put onto a canvas yet, just the separate colors, those have no meaning to anyone. We would say those are meaningless. Those are just colors. It's when you put them in a certain arrangement. That's when it has meaning.
Perhaps I can preempt something. I was going to make this argument perhaps later, but I would make the contention, and this will. I know that James would agree with this, but I would say that meaning is necessarily interpretive, in the sense that what we ascribe meaning to, even if it had an objective basis, epistemically, it's still filtered through a subjective understanding of the world.
In the sense that we have to discover, or like whether or not we discover or create our meaning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because in discovering your meaning, you still have to interpret the information that you received.
Correct.
Although I would say that meaning, I would say that the discovery of your meaning or reason for living would be also partially internal, I would say. So it's not 100% interpretive.
I would say that discovering, that's a weird language to put it in, because discovering, I can't live between discovering your meaning and creating your own meaning.
I'm sorry?
How is there a difference between discovering your meaning and creating your own meaning?
Okay. So I'm trying to figure out which one to start with. Okay. So within the theistic worldview, or Christianity at least, and many theistic worldviews that are not deistic, God created you specifically for a reason. Okay. And part of your job is to find out what that reason is. So in my belief, and I'm not a Calvinist or anything like that, so you don't have to be a Calvinist or something to understand this. But like God like put you on this planet for a reason. Okay.
Was my reason to make atheist YouTube videos?
That could be it. I don't know.
Wow. Okay.
It could be. I'm not going to tell you what yours is and is not. And part of that would be like God can use, and I mean no disrespect on that, but like God can use like sort of quote sinful actions to bring about greater glory. So that would be
remarkably honest with you. I appreciate you actually saying what you think there.
Yeah. Well,
like most people would dance around that. I really appreciate the direct honesty there.
Oh, James, I love having it. He won't do that. I love that.
I try to, yeah. So that would be discovering your meaning, your reason for living. Okay. The other part of that would be creating your reason for living, which is you within the atheistic worldview, which is obviously he's critiquing this part. You were not created for some sort of transcendent reason. Ultimately, it's an accident, and it's going back to that big thing, and you can look at like on the local level of like, well, your mom and dad really were attracted to each other, so boom, kind of thing.
Really quickly, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm gonna agree. I think you're right ontologically. Like it's you're right logically. I guess my issue is like the difference between creating meaning and discovering meaning epistemically. I don't understand the difference. Like because we don't know. Like well, okay, perhaps I won't go that far. Like let's say I create my meaning. My meaning is to take this little headphone attachment dongle and hold it in my hand for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Right. I've just created my own meaning. But in the same sense, epistemically, I've also discovered it. I've also figured out what my meaning is.
I was actually going to get to that part where like it goes into that bleeding part, where you can, that would be the free will part. So the part that would make me not a Calvinist is the fact that like there is this concept of creating your own meaning. Mm-hmm. I would say that creating your own meaning would be sort of a sin in that sense.
See, that's how would you? I guess we get a big rabbit hole
there.
Yeah, we get a rabbit hole.
Yeah, so it would go to the question of middle knowledge within God. Do either of you know what Molinism is or middle knowledge?
I'm aware of middle knowledge. Yeah.
Okay, so God can, God can have God does have the knowledge. For instance, we'll use the YouTube creating thing. God has the knowledge that you would do this, John, in this situation, in this world, or in this feasible world. So he creates this world in which you would do this. All right. Now, in one sense, sure, that is creative in the sense that God's primary reason for it might not be that you do this. Like that God didn't determine that you would do this, but God would allow for it to happen. So there's that creative part, and then there is that quote discovery part, because this is a world in which he allows it to happen.
See, I would never. We could get into
there is not enough time to get into that
yeah.
discussion.
But
We're
gonna. I'm just gonna ask this real quick. It was so this would be what I would ask. I'm not gonna ask. I don't really want an answer, but because like I said, it would be a huge rabbit hole to go down.
Okay.
But how would you ever have confidence in the distinction between the meaning you're creating and the meaning that was created for you?
Yep.
As a Christian, just directly as a Christian myself. Yeah. So I try to. I'm a big proponent of authorities within my own life and following and respecting those authorities, but also trying to search genuinely for truth. So I take in all the information I can. I try to learn what I can. I started as a Baptist. I became Anglican about 8 years ago, something like that. And I believe my meaning in life that is supposed to be a priest. So I go through that, discovering that. And part of like the clues for me was I did not want to go into ministry as a child. Like I hated, because my dad was a Baptist pastor, and I hated what I saw because he was mistreated by people, like angry moms about their teens and all that sort of stuff. And just, there's all sorts of different problems. I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with people like this, So God changed my heart in that. So you never have certainty in 100%, but like you can see like avenues happening. So things started like falling into place for me where like, my church has been helping me financially. I've been getting signs like so for instance, when I first went to seminary, my car broke down, or my car crashed. And so I was in a bit of a bind, and I prayed, and I told nobody about this, but I prayed and I asked that someone would send me $500 because I needed $500. And I got a check within that week for exactly $500 from somebody who I only know on Facebook. I've never met him in real life. And somebody who is like, he's not a fan of me. He doesn't like me.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
If that person would have sent you $600, would it have still been a sign from God?
For me, I would have said, that's interesting. Maybe even more than I saw, because it would still be 500. I would have still received 500.
It would still be 500, but it wouldn't be a fulfilling of prayer. It would be an extra added on to what you prayed for.
Yeah.
So the 500 would have been an answer to prayer. What's the other 100 mean?
Yeah.
Maybe God's saying you need more.
So yeah, so what I'm saying is like this is not what the video is about, but regardless, this is an issue that I have with the idea of answered prayer, which is, now what happens if you don't get any money, but the next day you wake up and you win the lottery? Did God give you something better?
I don't know, but I'm working in not hypotheticals, because so my problem with those sorts of hypotheticals is we're just throwing them out there, and it could mean a whole variety of things depending on the situation within you're found. So within my situation is what I'm talking about. I'm only talking about my scenario.
No, exactly. You're right.
And I've got actually quite a few examples of those things. And
you just did a brilliant job demonstrating exactly why answered prayer is unreliable, because you said that it's situation specific. And I said, yes, of course it is. So if the situation would have been different, so if the attempt was to see whether or not God was putting you on the right track, can you name me a way that situation would have turned out to where you would have said God is not putting me on the right track?
Yeah. So if I keep running into barriers that just don't allow me to get to where I'm trying to get to, all right. So, like for instance, the car crash happened, and I was in a rough bind. If it was something that suddenly, like, I couldn't go to seminary because of that, I'd be like, oh, well, maybe I'm not called to go to seminary, at
you
least
could
for
say
right now.
that, but like
That's
think about biblical stories, like when Jesus goes through the desert and is tempted by the serpent. If Jesus just said, maybe this isn't my path, and walked out of the desert, what would have happened? Like the point that I'm illustrating to you is that if signs from God eventually become sufficient for you to change your path, how do we know? Like, how do we differentiate, God wants me to do this versus, shit happens?
Well, I don't think crap happen. I'm not going to cuss on here. Sorry.
No, you're
I
fine.
don't think crap
You're totally fine.
Yeah. Not that I'm opposed to cussing, but just for sake of me having the collar on. But yeah, I don't think crap.
Yeah, you don't
I
want
don't
me. You don't want me editing out a part with it, you wearing a collar and and cussing or something. I understand that. Someone would definitely grab that clip. I guarantee it wouldn't even be me. Someone would find it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think that would be like. I don't think just crap happens. Right. I think that we should look and see why things are happening to us. Now,
I agree.
I'm not pointing to a scenario where it is, well, 50-50. I was at that point where, like, I'm exactly at 50-50, and because of the prayer that was answered, therefore it just jumped to 51-49. That's not my point. Because I was like, I had other points beyond that and before that. In fact, I actually have a book that I keep of, like, written down of all the times where those sorts of moments happened, and like, it's actually for pages, like quite a few pages.
No, yeah, I'm what I'll do is I'll just kind of recommend you in like 2 weeks. I'll have a counter apologetic video going up for answered prayer.
Okay.
And there's like a 7-page response that I have to this like idea that you're bringing up, and instead of hashing it out on a video about meaning and atheism, we'll just kind of bottle that for right now, and try to go back to the meaning and atheism.
Or y'all come back next weekend and we can go over answered prayer. We can do
we
that.
can try, yeah.
We can do that. That's no problem. I'd love to do that.
I'm actually starting to travel next week, but yeah.
Okay. Anytime y'all want to. Or y'all can do it. You don't have to come on here, obviously. Feel free to go on any channel. Go on Christian's channel. I'm not trying to monopolize your time. No, yeah, just and if y'all do set that discussion, let me know because I want to watch it.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's hear. Lucas we're about halfway through Lucas's video.
Purpose won't matter either at the end of the day. Let me illustrate this. Imagine we lived in a world in which healthy food does not exist, but everything we take in would cause us to become sick. Now, in such a world, you are, of course, free to talk about creating for yourself a healthy diet. But that would not change the fact that whatever so-called diet you pick, it will make you sick, just like any other food you could take in. In the same way, to say that the universe is ultimately meaningless, but that you can still pick some cute little diet of meaning for yourself is nothing short of delusional. By the way, you don't have to take my word for it.
So when someone makes an analogy, in order to make it no longer valid, you have to give a disanalogy. And here's the disanalogy for what he just said. He's talking about vomiting and diets, and not once does he explain the mechanism on why the whole necessarily applies to the parts in his initial sentence. All he does is then bring it to an analogy where the whole necessarily applies to the parts, and he never explains why that's true in both instances, and he never makes the analogy clear enough to where we can figure out what the mechanism similarities are.
Right.
And that's where the disanalogy is. He's flat out wrong on that issue.
Right. He's setting up he's sort of just setting up the parameters to fit his narrative in that sense. Just necessarily every food makes you sick, so there's no way to get any food that doesn't make you sick. It just becomes one of those,
which is interesting because I would almost prefer he didn't give us analogies and actually demonstrated the first claim. But
oh yeah,
I finally had to do it. Give the demonstration. I have to throw the demonstration. It's a dog whistle. Leave me alone. But regardless.
Check out Friedrich Nietzsche or Jean-Paul Sartre, who are two of history's most important atheist philosophers. Nietzsche said that once you do away with God, the world will basically turn into something like an abandoned, dark, haunted marketplace where no one wants to be, as it's been completely drained of meaning.
Pause really quickly.
Can I say
David-
something real quick? Sorry.
David Hume, then go ahead.
Okay. Every atheist should read Nietzsche.
I have read. Oh God, nope, not enough time. Okay, well we'll just keep going into the video. I could get into Nietzsche and Hume and all that. Okay, just never mind. Regardless, go.
Truly lived what he preached, as he spent the last years of his life in a madhouse. Similarly, Sartre, in his play No Exit, depicted reality without God, ironically.
I'm curious why he just did air quotes.
For which part?
Hold on. Let me back it up.
In asylum thing or madhouse or something? Is that what he did?
No.
In his play No Exit, depicted reality without.
Like was the
because that's the title
play,
of it, I guess.
Well, yeah, but was the play ironically? Don't we do that when we do it like you air quotes when it's like ironic or something?
I guess it's just more of a with a play you would have it in quotes.
Would
So I
you?
guess that was his.
Okay, I figured a play would be just like in italics or something.
No, plays in quotes. I think that.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if he was attempting to be facetious and just like doing this to like make fun of it, or if he was doing this to actually properly grammatically accurate in like the video. I don't really know. There's no way to really decipher what he means.
I think it makes sense because he's saying, the name of it is No Exit,
Right.
and like just to show, hey, this is the title kind of thing.
Oh, okay. It's like I thought he was like okay, if you say the play No Exit, I guess
That's the problem when the entire video is so sassy and then you suddenly start using grammar.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know. I will say this though, Lucas has like a great scenery set up. I wish I had his wallpaper. It's awesome.
Oh yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm jealous, dude. Okay.
God, ironically enough, as hell, and affirmed that life was absurd, but that we should just get on with it somehow, I guess. More recently, another atheist philosopher, Loyal Rue, confessed that even though all of reality is utterly meaningless, we cannot actually live this way, as this would lead to something of an existential collapse. And so he blatantly suggested that we should just deceive ourselves and propagate what he called the noble lie that meaning exists, even though it really doesn't. So, as I said in the beginning, when atheists talk about creating meaning, they are simply deluding themselves. It's probably only a minority who, like Dr. Rue, actually admit that meaning.
Okay, so I understand, like, this guy, he's got an audience to appeal to. I do it all the time on my show. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand. But it's like, we have a Christian here and two atheists, and nobody is like professionally sassy right now. And this guy is taking passive aggressiveness to the next level. Like I get it. Your point is well made. I understand what you're saying, but I'm waiting for some real substantiation, because all he's done is make the division fallacy and then reassert the division fallacy over and over and over and over and over again. Like, I want to see something new from this guy than just reasserting that what is true of the sum has to be true of the parts.
So I think it is what is true of the sum has to be true of the parts if he defines meaning as that transcendent objective meaning that can only come from God in the first place. All right?
Yeah, like if you define meaning as God dependent, then God independent, it would not exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's his point. And I don't use this argument. I use a different argument that talks about meaning, or actually a few different arguments that talk about meaning, but I'm not a big fan of this one because you can just be like, okay, well, I don't have an objective transcendent meaning. Okay.
But it's interesting that he quotes these atheist philosophers that are essentially nihilists, but he quotes them.
He leaves out a couple other ones.
Right. He's completely cherry picked these ones that suit his narrative, and left out plenty of others.
What's interesting is that the thing is what the philosophers he's citing are saying is not necessarily false. It's just that he's using them as a representation of what meaning means to most atheists. And it is in fact the case that most atheists don't see the word meaning and think transcendent and God dependent. That wouldn't really make any sense. why would atheists think that if the God doesn't exist in their worldview?
I think the practical, because I tend to be as practical as possible in my philosophy and theology. I think the practical effect of this is that ultimately, like in the big picture, and where there is no reason, like 5 billion years from now, what you do does not matter if you're an atheist, we would say.
Or if you're a theist.
I would say as a theist, yes, it does.
Can you give an example?
Well, in the salvation of eternal souls, I mean, I'm being enjoined into that mission. So
Sorry,
yeah.
an example that doesn't require me to agree to your theology.
Oh no, yeah.
Okay, there we go. I was just curious because like I didn't know.
This is why I don't use that critique, like or this critique exactly. Yeah.
That's a good point. I would agree. Yeah.
Well, on determinism, I would disagree. On determinism, that would I'm just one domino that's tipping over another.
If you're determining meaning as what has persistent effects beyond what happened initially, then yeah, under determinism, yes.
Well, I think meaning is, and I'll get it. Like I said, I'll go ahead and get into that now. When Lucas and I had a few comments we exchanged, I asked him. I said, "Okay, I'm going to give you a syllogism. I want you to tell me if you agree with this. Premise 1: if the universe is meaningless, and I might not get this exactly like I said it, but if the universe is meaningless, human beings have no meaning. Premise 2: the universe is meaningless. Conclusion: therefore, human beings have no meaning." He's like, "Yes, that's exactly my argument completely."
Yeah, I would not follow with that, because only unless you're talking about that meaning as being transcendent, because you can have subjective contingent meaning.
Well, here's the thing though. When
it's begging the question fallacy in a sense, because you're putting in the premise what should be proved in the conclusion.
Yeah, this is why I don't use this argument.
Yeah.
Right. So when I gave, I say, okay, well, I'm going to give you both these syllogisms, and I disagree with both of them for the same reason. And he objected to my second one for the exact reason I object to both of them. And the second one is if the universe is not hungry, human beings cannot be hungry. The universe is not hungry, therefore human beings cannot be hungry. And he said, well, I would argue that being hungry requires sentience, requires it be requires a mind, requires it to be sentient. I said I would say the same thing about meaning.
But your point is well taken, and it's actually true in a different way, in the sense that you just described to him why the fallacy of division is true, which is you just described to him why we cannot divide the sum into parts and then apply the characteristics of the sum necessarily to the parts.
Right. I already told him it was the composition division fallacy that he would.
If he can object to hungry in the whole necessarily applying to hungry in the parts, but he assents to the proposition that meaning in the whole must or vapid of meaning in the whole. Yeah, like it's a contradiction of the highest degree. Like that's actually that's not good. Like
right. That was my point. It was like you disagree with my second one, but the second one makes the same fallacy as the first one.
Correct. Yep.
And his response was that being hungry requires that you be sentient. Experiencing hunger requires sentience. I would say experiencing meaning also requires sentience.
I dig that.
And he kind of, that's where the kind of thread kind of, I think one of us didn't respond. It might have even been me. I don't remember. But that was the last part of it I remember. So I'm wondering, I'd love to hear his response to that, but that was kind of my whole thing is unless he wants to argue that the universe is sentient, then I don't see how he could.
Or he has to provide a defeater for the syllogism. Like either he does that or he has to provide a defeater. Like otherwise he's locked in a bind where he's assented to a syllogism of which he rejects a syllogism of the same structure. Like he would have to find a reason why they're different, or he would have to change to either assent to both or reject both.
Right. Well, I think I think in a sense he would have to reject. I think he would have to reject, but you would have to reject both because they're both fallacious. But
he could assent to both. He would just be wrong.
Right. But if his qualifier, the difference he found in those two arguments is that one requires sentience and one doesn't, I want to know how you get meaning without sentience from either one. Like, how could even, I mean, how could a rock experience meaning?
It loves itself. I don't know.
I mean, that's so. As I said, these are, to me, these are two things that are contingent on sentience. And that was this is what he brought up. He brought up that hunger requires that the being experiencing that be sentient. I agree, but so does meaning. And unless you can demonstrate how a non-sentient being could experience meaning.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah,
it's a good point.
That was my sort of back and forth with them a little bit, and I'd love to hear the answer one day. Hopefully, get him on or something. But so that and this idea, like I said, that's why I kind of get to this in the moral argument too, where.
Wait a minute. Are we going to go into this? Or
no. It's just I just talk about the subjectivity of it.
Okay.
Because to me, they're almost. To me, these are. It appears anyway that all of these things like meaning and, love and sadness and all of these things are products of the brain. Opinions, preferences. So I don't really see a disconnect, as in what causes these things.
So things about the mind. So okay. This is getting into like intricate philosophy, right? And like dipping into neuroscience.
Right.
In the sense that like you have like, how do I explain this? All right, so you say that I like cheese. So it is a subjective opinion that you like cheese. But
no. It is true that I like cheese. It is you're right. The opinion is subjective.
Yeah, that's what I said.
It is a fact that it is objectively true that I like cheese.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Okay.
That's what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, I was going to say it's subjectively true that I enjoy cheese. It's a preference of mine, but it's also objectively true that is in fact my preference. And
right.
So it comes into a bit of a different conversation there. But I think what do we got left in the video? Like 2 minutes?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we're essentially done. But
yeah.
I want to make sure I don't miss anything.
Yeah, we'll finish it out and see what.
Meaning can only be affirmed by an act of straightforward self-deception. But this doesn't change the fact that self-delusion is exactly what's going on here. Having said all this, there is one last thing which needs to be mentioned here, which further adds insult to injury. Think about this. If objective meaning doesn't exist, how come the atheist comes to the meaningful conclusion that this is so? See, the sentence, "there is no objective meaning to the universe," is itself a statement that claims to carry objective meaning, and yet the proposition is that the universe is devoid of such meaning.
Okay, I don't think that statement claims to carry objective meaning. It could claim to carry subjective meaning too.
I think there's an equivocation on the word meaning there. Yeah.
What he means by meaning earlier in the video is not what he means by meaning in that sentence, and that's purposefully. Well, I shouldn't say purposefully. It's deceptive, whether purpose is intentional or not.
Yeah, yeah. The problem is that he's talking about meaning as in definition at this point, and he was prior talking about meaning as in like reason for living,
transcendent, absolute meaning.
Yeah,
exactly.
So yeah, I would find that to be a major problem. I would definitely, obviously, disagree with him there. Yeah.
Hear that, Lucas? Another Christian disagrees with you.
We steered into pre-sup land for a second there. I started to get scared because they were like, how can you account for intelligibility independent of a fundamentally non-contingent contingency? And I'm like, oh my God, please stop.
I haven't gotten the pre-sup vibe from Lucas yet, but
yeah,
I see what you're saying.
Hopefully,
yeah,
it scared me for a second. I was like, I'm so used to talking to presuppositionalists that I was like, please don't, like, not live. Please don't do it.
No, I'm gonna message Lucas and say, hey, you got your atheist philosophers that you want to cite? I'm citing Deacon James. That's right.
I'm
That's right.
excited. Awesome.
That's right. He says you're wrong.
Oh boy.
Let's close it out. I think we go.
Which means that the atheist's denial of objective meaning is nothing but a self-contradiction and therefore complete nonsense. Christianity, on the other hand, can coherently affirm meaning as it postulates a divine mind who has infused the entire universe as well as human existence with meaning and value. This is why it's not only the more rational option than atheism, but also the one that is more practically relevant and actually livable. Now, does any of what I said?
Say what I know you're going to say. Say it.
Why did we invoke rationalism here? Like
I thought you were saying something different.
We're talking about meaning, and we're talking about what could objective meaning look like, and now we're talking about how atheism isn't rational. Like
I was going to say,
starting to add descriptors here. Like, why are we doing this?
I was going to say that he says Christianity can account for these. Well, in theory, just theism in general can account for these if he's trying to be consistent. It doesn't necessarily Christianity only. So he shouldn't have said Christianity there.
It still screws atheism, right? Because atheism is a rejection of general.
To be fair, though, like this is an 8.5-minute video, and I'm not going to expect someone to like answer every question because then it's going to be
sure.
Yeah.
I think
he's giving a snippet of like this is his goal, and I to me as a Christian, I see this as him presenting it to people who are like, I'm Christian, but I've heard about this atheism thing. Let me find out more about it. Like it's that sort of thing.
Which I think is concerning, right? Because if your target audience is the vulnerable, that seems a little dishonest. Like, shouldn't you try to convince someone that they're most intellectually strong as opposed to their most intellectually weak?
Well, I wouldn't say it's vulnerable. Like, how are you defining vulnerable there?
Like, so, like someone who's teetering on the edge of like apologist level confidence in like I'm considering atheism. If to save them from atheism, you make a bunch of equivocations and fallacies, and they buy it because they already believe in the premise. To me, that's preying on the vulnerable.
Yeah. So regardless of the equivocations and fallacies, my point is that he is giving a video that is dealing with the understood presuppositions of Christianity. So this is from someone who has in the past already held to those presuppositions and is considering the other ones. So it is an insider discussion of someone who is an insider but is looking outside.
Yeah, I could tell by the sassiness.
Yeah. So regardless of like the equivocations and fallacies, and I do have problems with obviously those. I'm not obviously in as much disagreement with him as you guys are, but yeah, I do have significant issues. I think this is obviously preaching quote to the choir, and I don't. There are videos that just need to have preaching to the choir. I'm not against that. Like I'm fine if atheists do that in one sense, and I'm fine if Christians do that. Obviously,
that's what the atheist experience is for.
Thank you. Yes.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, I love watching the atheist experience, but I love watching it because I already agree with Matt.
Yeah.
I need to go through and like figure out how many times in non-AXP videos AXP gets mentioned.
A lot.
I would love to put a compilation together.
I mean,
they
do great work in Austin.
Oh yeah, I love it. I just love it that like, 'cause I love that there is that like monolith, in the atheist community that everyone points to.
I don't pretend to disassociate from the ACA.
No,
like I talk to V and Jenna and Matt and all that. Like it's not that I'm disassociating. I'm just like the atheist experience is called the atheist experience for a reason.
Yeah.
Like
he's a good atheist pastor. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, he's awesome
He is an atheist pastor. You can't deny that.
No, I'll tell you about the actual guy, the YouTube.
I oughta take that clip and send it to Matt, and he'll literally like seriously he'll combust in anger that you just said that.
There is a YouTuber. No, there is a YouTuber named Atheist Pastor.
Yeah. What's his?
He's great. Chris is his name.
Chris Atlee, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
He's so cool. Yeah. So yeah, I trust me. I've been watching AXP for years. I love it. I watch Talk Heathen, Truth Wanted, all of them. They're awesome.
Like John, like imagine if you watched Matt rip apart Christianity as a Christian. Like, it's the same thing that like this guy's doing. Like he's taking things that we already agree upon as atheists and then saying, you know, well, obviously this, obviously that, and obviously, and I agree with him. Like, I love Matt. I love watching Matt. But it's like, in the same way that this guy is preaching to the choir, Matt's, you know, remove preaching and choir, he's talking to the heathens.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the style of his approach.
And like I have seen, you know, the atheist experience and other obviously atheist videos, and I am that one who's like, who would look at these and like, okay, yeah, that's not quite true. Yeah, that's technically right, but like I would have problems equally. And that's just sort of the nature, because we're talking about two fundamentally different worldviews.
Yeah.
But with this video, I agree that it's not just that there's a different worldview going on, so the insider outsider thing, but it's also that there are actual problems within the arguments themselves.
So that's what I tend to be. I tend to be harder on people who also say they're atheists, and then they'll say something, and I'm just like, oh no, don't do that. No, that's bad. Please stop. And I'll jump in and like,
it's almost like atheism and Christianity aren't monoliths.
Yeah,
almost.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah, I've been on a few atheist channels, doing, you know, talking with them, and it's so interesting because the average atheist I deal with is a former evangelical, and I am not an evangelical. I grew up as an evangelical, but I'm not. So I have very different understanding of Scripture, of who exactly Jesus is, of what even salvation is, and they're completely blown away. Not like blown away impressed, but it's a very different conversation than from what they were expecting to have. You know, so yeah, it's not a monolith. No.
All right, should we finish up the video?
oh yeah.
Proof that atheism is false and that God exists? No. Or does it suggest that all atheists are miserable? No. What it does show, however, is that atheists who hold onto their self-contradictory notion of meaning are rather like castaways who hope to be rescued by catching a deflated life belt. Here's the thing. We talk about meaning all the time. And if you're watching this video, you're likely to care about meaning yourself. Now, this intuition of ours that our lives are actually meaningful is fully expected and no surprise on the assumption that Christianity is true. However, if we assume atheism to be true, the very fact that we talk about meaning cannot be explained, but it can only be explained away. But hey, then again, rational explanations have never been a strength of atheists in the first place. So I guess there's really no surprise to that. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, it's over. Screw that.
It's like
I forgot about that part.
Yeah, that's so obviously ad hominem aside, right? He ends the video with the fourth bad analogy. And I
love that he called it a deflated life vest when his channel is called Deflate.
Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah, well, okay. I'm restraining myself from going below the brow because I'm taking the high road, because even though even though my hobby is heathenism, I do tend to stay above the brow sometimes. But the end was an ad hominem, and that was kind of a jerk move. But we refuted your video, buddy. Even a Christian did it for us. So,
well, I wouldn't say I refuted the video in the entirety, because my thing is there's a lot I agree with. So I do agree. So, for instance, with what he said at the end, I as someone who was agnostic for about a year or so and honestly trying to be atheist, for me, I can't comprehend how atheism makes sense. And that was as someone who tried to be an atheist.
Dude, same, brother, but only for you.
I'm sorry?
I said same, but only on your worldview.
Which is fine. Yeah, whatever. And my point being, like, so from my perspective, yeah, like I'd see it as utterly irrational. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong about that, obviously. And obviously you guys think I'm wrong about that. So, like, to throw that out, that is obviously, again, an insider thing. So I don't think he's really aiming this at atheists who are well established in their worldview. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think, while the thing is, I have so many Christian friends, and they think my worldview is ridiculous. I think their worldview is ridiculous, but we sit down and we talk about it.
Yeah.
Like you can be consistent and say, I think your worldview is fallacious and a bunch of crap, and you can think the same thing about me, but we can still talk about why it is such things.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm not going to begrudge him. Like, he can do the channel and aim it towards whoever he wants. Do I think this is a video that is meant to foster dialogue between atheists and theists? I don't believe so, and I don't think that's necessarily his intent, which is whatever. But like, then you have people who want to critique it.
I want to play it one more time.
I think is equally good.
I want to play it one more time.
However, if we assume atheism to be true, the very fact that we talk about meaning cannot be explained, but it can only be explained away. But hey, then again, rational explanations have never been a strength of atheists in the first place. So rational explanations have never been a strength of atheists in the first place.
I love playing that.
Rational explanations have never been a strength of theists in the first place. I can do it too. Like it's I don't know. I'm more charitable with people that I disagree with. I like to think they're good faith and honest until they show me otherwise.
Oh.
So
we're all I guess we're all irrational.
I can't speak about irrationality because I'm as an Anglican, I literally believe that when I'm receiving communion, I'm eating the body and blood of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So
Well, I'll tell you what.
I would say that's highly rational.
It's funny because, like I said, I gave Lucas 2 syllogisms that were both fallacious for the same reason. He agreed with one and disagreed with the other. So,
would you consider yourself a cannibal?
No. And we could get into that theology, but yeah,
we'll do that later.
The theology of cannibalism.
Just the first thing that came to my mind when you said it's the actual body of Christ, I was like, that is potentially cannibalism. So that was the first question that I had. But
yeah, it would potentially be cannibalism, but like it's difficult, and I'd have to. I want
cannibalism.
I would actually have to want to study it myself because I love Eucharistic theology, but I always want to make sure what I'm presenting is as accurate as possible. So I'd have to, but yeah, it's not cannibalism, we would say. Yeah.
Beautiful. I got to get this guy on my show. I like this guy.
Thank you.
Y'all are both great, guys. We've gone about over an hour and a half. I like to keep it right at an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate y'all coming. One of the best streams I've had so far. Hey. I've had a great time. Please, both of y'all are obviously welcome to come back anytime. I will keep y'all up to date. I'll be sending y'all some invites to some more soon. Hopefully I can get some more going. With the schedule and everything, I don't get to do this very often. Hopefully one day I'll get to do some more on a regular schedule. Right now it's hit or miss. But I want to thank y'all for staying up late with me and watching this video with me and giving me your takes on it.
Awesome.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Thank y'all,
Thanks
guys.
for having me.
We're going to end it there. See y'all next time.
Peace.